Good afternoon and welcome. I'm John Cosworth, Provost of the University, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon to the third annual Celebration of Teaching and Learning Symposium. Thanks for coming. It should be an exciting afternoon. This annual event celebrates the innovative efforts of faculty and graduate students in transforming their teaching and brings together Columbia faculty, students, and administrators to celebrate their accomplishments. I want to say a word of special thanks to Suleiman Kachani, who is the Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning, and to Katherine Ross, who's the Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at Columbia, which has only been here 3 years, but seems like it's been here forever. This year, we are pleased to have Cathy Davidson, educator and author of The New Education, How to Revolutionize the University to Prepare Students for a World in Flux, as our keynote speaker. Davidson is the founding director of the Futures Initiative, a distinguished professor in the PhD program in English at CUNY's Graduate Center, and the R.F. Delaney Professor Emerita of Interdisciplinary Studies at Duke University. You'll hear from her later today. Today's events feature presentations by Columbia faculty and graduate student instructors who will share their experiences working to solve problems and improving learning in their classrooms. We are also hosting participatory discussions involving all of you around Cathy Davidson's strategies for engaging students in their learning, as well as a visual showcase of insights from Columbia students. We have a table on College Walk. It stopped raining for a while. I don't know if it's started up again, but you're welcome to visit. It's collecting feedback from students on how they best learn, and we will share their observations with all of you today. After the keynote talk, you are invited to a reception and a faculty and graduate student poster exhibit. In addition to events like the symposium, the Provost's Office supports teaching innovations through funding opportunities. And since 2014, we have awarded over 80 grants, and several awardees are participating in today's events. Today is an opportunity to celebrate their successful course design projects. The Office of the Provost recently launched the 2018 Request for Proposals for those of you who are looking to integrate new educational methods and technologies into your classrooms and learning environments. So we have an exciting afternoon for you. We hope you will take advantage of this opportunity today to explore new ideas for your own teaching and make new connections with a community of inspired teachers and learners at Columbia, and meet our CTL staff as well. Thank you all very much for coming. Enjoy the afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Katherine Ross, the still new Executive Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning, and I am just so delighted to welcome you here this afternoon for what is my first symposium, Celebration of Teaching and Learning Symposium, but the CTL's and the Provost Office's third symposium. We are just really excited that you're all here. I'm curious who's all in the room. Do we have any undergrad students joining us today? Woohoo! Okay, grad students? Yeah. And faculty? Yeah, great. Great, that's wonderful. So I'm here to introduce our speaker. Cathy Davidson, as many of you may know, is known for being an educational innovator and a distinguished scholar of the history of technology and higher ed. And she is an avid proponent of active learning as a tool that helps students to understand and navigate the radically changed global world in which we now all live and work and learn. Professor Davidson is a distinguished professor of English, the founding director of the Futures Initiative at the Graduate Center at CUNY, and she is the R.F. DeVarney Professor Emerita of Interdisciplinary Studies at Duke University, where she served as Duke's and the nation's first Vice Provost for Interdisciplinary Studies. She is the co-founding director, now co-director, of Haystack. Some of you may have heard of this. This is the Humanities, Arts, Science, and Technology Alliance and Collaboratory. She is on the board of directors at Mozilla and served on the National Council of the Humanities as an appointee of President Barack Obama. She is the 2016 recipient of the Ernest J. Boyer Award for significant contributions to higher education. She is a champion of new ideas and methods for learning and professional development in school, in the workplace, and in everyday life. In this talk, Professor Davidson situates the modern research university within its Taylorist origins, and I'll let her explain that to you. She asks provocatively what higher education would look like if we were to consider deeply and thoroughly the kind of university that students need today to prepare them for the complexities of the world that they have inherited. As a former student of Professor Davidson's 2013 MOOC, The History and Future, parentheses, of mostly higher education, I am especially delighted to present to you our speaker today, distinguished Professor Cathy Davidson.
Thanks, Catherine. I believe you were the best student in that class. And thanks to everybody at Columbia for welcoming me today. I had a wonderful meeting just prior to this with the provost and a number of faculty who are exploring innovative, is this okay? I don't need that, right? I don't need the mic. Innovative teaching, and it was very exciting to hear about things that are happening here at Columbia. Start with a little bit of history. Charles was a young man who thought he had his future taken care of. He was one of the lucky ones. He had a trust fund. He didn't have to support himself with his own occupation, and he loved what he did. He was a theoretical chemist of the kind that didn't make much money, but maybe could change the world. Then his father lost everything in the financial crisis, and suddenly he was faced with what my students call a quarter-life crisis. What am I going to do? What am I going to do with my life? How am I going to earn a living? Do I like this job I just got? Am I one of the 94% of new graduates, according to the CAT study? 94% of all new graduates in new kinds of jobs created in the last decade are going to be in some form of contingent labor, meaning part-time, work by the job, not benefits, not security. WeWork is, I think, one of the fastest growing businesses I guess, worldwide right now. Quarter-life crisis is a celebration of that, a lament of that, what am I going to do? Except the Charles I'm talking about, of course, is Charles Eliot. And the situation I'm describing is so parallel to the one today. He was a 25-year-old professor of theoretical chemistry at Harvard at a time when you weren't expected. This voice is very strange. Is it okay? Can everyone hear? Okay. At a time when it wasn't expected that you earned your income as a professor. Of course not, because your father went to Harvard, his father went to Harvard, and you had money. You earned an honorarium, not a salary. His father lost the entire Eliot family fortune in the Panic of 1857, the world's first general massive financial crisis. In Europe, it was thought that the cause of the Panic of 1857 was America's terrible education system. Because Americans were making, and this will sound a little familiar, were making incredible strides in inventions, in technology, in industry, but still had a system of higher education where the most elite Americans were going to college to train them to be ministers. The college system had not changed very much since the Puritan colleges originally established in the United States. At that time, at Harvard, which was still based on the Puritan college model, only 10 to 20% of students actually went on to be ministers. So what Eliot was thinking was that there was a mismatch shared by pretty much everybody in Europe between the ambitions of this country and the education that prepared people to actually be the professional managerial class, to run the new industries that were being made. Eliot lucked out. He had another grandfather that passed away and left him enough money to go with himself, his wife, and his 2 young children to Europe for 2 years. And he went to Europe to study the German system of education that had gone through remarkable changes in the 19th century. The Humboldtian University was specifically designed to train a new professional managerial class. So Eliot studied that university. He went to France and studied the very different French university, and he came back and had a job at one of the first new upstart universities based on the German system, a little university called MIT. MIT actually paid its faculty a living wage because it thought of itself as a new modern university, not just an inheritance. While he was at MIT, Charles Eliot wrote an essay called The New Education. He stole my title. The New Education appeared in 1869, and it appeared in 2 issues of the Atlantic Monthly magazine, and was one of the most read and controversial essays to appear at that time. And basically, he said there was nothing suitable about the current system of education, and everything needed to be changed. Unfortunately, I usually read these slides, and I'm going to have a little bit of difficulty reading them from here, I'm afraid. Maybe. Okay, I might have to come down and cuddle with one of these slides. It requires courage to quit the beaten paths in which the great majority of well-educated men have walked and still walked. Conservatism is never more respectable than an education, for nowhere are the risks greater. Right? We're educating people's children. Right? The parents of those children went to school in a different system, right? In an older system. It was good enough for me, why isn't it good enough for you? So you have many cultural constraints telling you why you can't change higher education, even in the face of something like the Panic of 1857, where you have a worldwide financial crisis that's being reported on Morse code faster than anyone can cope with the challenge. Astonishingly, Harvard had gone through 3 presidents in quick succession, and they called Charles Eliot, 34 years old, said, "How would you like to be our president?" He said yes. And he served as Harvard's president for an unprecedented 40 years. Okay? During that time, he or one of his friends or one of his students transformed pretty much everything about higher education. His idea was if K through 12, the new compulsory system of public education, K through 12 compulsory education, was to design factory workers, farmers to be factory workers. And everything about this system of education was to instill the values of the factory in farmers. Anyone here remotely come from a farm background? Oh, yay, not very often, right? The key part of being a farmer is you're constantly making decisions yourself. You have to. If you have like a mental to-do list that you have to fix the fences that day, I'm from Chicago. So I learned about being a farmer through a marriage to somebody whose family were actually ranchers. It was like so interesting. But if you're a farmer or a rancher and you have a list that says you're going to fix the fences that day, and you ride out into the field and you find that your prized cattle are caught up in the fences and bleeding, you're an idiot if you take the time to fix the fence rather than to deal with the cow or the horse that's bleeding. You're constantly making changes. If it rains, you do something. If it's sunny, you do something. Summer, you do some things. In winter, you do other things. The factory is about regularity. It's about time. It's about somebody else telling you what to do. It's about hierarchy. And it's about never using your own brain to question the efficacy of the job you're doing. Eliot believed that what America most needed was an infrastructure of professional managerial class that could train and be at another management level for those kinds of industrial factory systems. He was very, very much influenced by the great labor theorist of the 19th century, Frederick Winslow Taylor, who believed that outputs and productivity should and could and must be measured. And let's look at some of the things that Eliot put into, Eliot, his colleagues, his friends, or people he influenced put into higher education during his 40 years. Mandatory public secondary schooling, K through 12 curriculum requirements, land-grant universities, research universities, majors, minors, electives, divisions, certification, graduate school, collegiate law school, nursing school, graduate school of education, collegiate business school, degree requirements, credit hours, grades, statistics, imported to higher education, and actually invented as a field. Standard deviation, spreadsheets, blueprints, return on equity, punch clocks, IQ tests, giftedness, learning disabilities, multiple choice tests, college entrance exams, multiple choice college entrance exams. The SATs are fully in place by 1925. Tenure, sabbaticals, faculty pensions, school rankings, donor named chairs, corporate sponsorship of research, adolescence, and failure. I don't think there's anything on that list, a list that was fully in place by 1925, that I have to define for anybody here. Why? Because it's the world we live in, right? It's the educational system we have right now. There's two things in red, and I actually did this work for my last book, which was more based on cognitive neuroscience and focused on K through 12. But it's such a great story. I love telling it. And that's grades and failure. The first college in the United States to deviate from the standard way of grading, which was either by conversation with a professor or long discursive grades, was a women's college, Mount Holyoke. Why a women's college? Because this was a time when women were thought to finally be educated. Barnard is created around the same time. And it was thought that you could sell the industrial age by convincing women that the industrial age was really about labor-saving devices. So Mount Holyoke was going to train the modern women and go to this amazing new productivity system where you took all the complex things students learn and don't learn in a semester, you reduced them to one letter grade. If you go to the archives at Mount Holyoke, you find out the huge debate at Mount Holyoke was, what about an E? A, B, C, D don't stand for anything. E shouldn't. But they were terrified if you gave someone an E that someone would think they were excellent rather than failing. So there's a whole debate about the importance of not giving an E, but using this scientific system of A, B, C, D, non-referential, and F, failure. What's fascinating by that, two things. One, within a year of assuming of the F as a failure, there's a whole study among the brand new field of psychology and sociology about what is a failure, right? We go not from you didn't pass a course to who is a failure, what type of person is a failure, who fails, right? There's a whole sociology, and out of that comes giftedness and learning disabilities as fields. Second interesting thing, the second major organization after Mount Holyoke to say, hey, ABCDF, that's a kind of an interesting thing. Let's think about adopting that for our field, is the American Meat Packers Association. And if you go to the archives of the American Meat Packers Association, they don't argue about A, B, C, D, and what happens if we give an E. They're worried about how you can take something as complex and subtle as the difference between sirloin and chuck and reduce it to something as brainless and simplistic as a letter grade? So to this day, actually my research on this is about a decade old, but a decade ago I actually went to the American Meat Packers Association and interviewed people. And it turned out that at least 10 years ago, and probably to this day, every piece of meat travels with its own metadata. Metadata is all of that stuff behind anything that's represented. For example, who gave the A, B, C, D, F grade? What other grades did that person give? What were those written comments that resulted in a grade? Meanwhile, all over higher education and K through 12, people abandon discursive grades and go quite quickly without that kind of debate and discussion to A, B, C, D, F grading. Now, a footnote here, and I'm not going to talk about this today, this enraged many people in the whole progressive movement in education. You know some of the names, Montessori and Dewey being the most prominent, but there are many others, is outraged at that, and that's in fact one of the things that causes the progressive movement in education. But grades, numbers, reducing the complexity of all the different ways we learn in a classroom is adopted almost everywhere in higher education. The other thing that's interesting about this time, and I'm not going to read this, I think you can, I hope everyone can see, same time that the grading changes, and one of my friends, Fred Moten, the great Afrofuturist poet and theorist, said, if you were a Martian and came down to America and looked at American educational system, K through professional school, you'd say, I get it. This thing, this phenomenon I'm looking at is about people with power telling people with less power how bad they are. It's kind of sad, but in fact, I don't think there's a website of any university in America that doesn't say what the average SAT score is. We worry about grade inflation. There's all of these kinds of issues that we worry about that are about grading. Interestingly, the professions, and Charles Eliot is right in there developing these professions, are being created at the same time that higher education is going to this output-oriented productivity level. So the people who are creating the standards for higher education are also creating the standards by which to judge one another. Virtually every major professional association is being created at the same time, including the standards for accrediting universities are created at the same time that the universities are going through these changes. Interestingly, even though there's a wide range of universities, Harvard, one of those is a picture of one of the first land-grant universities. 70% of land-grant universities had presidents who came from Harvard or the Ivy Leagues, many of them students of Charles Eliot. And Joliet Community College, which actually was one of the first places I ever taught at, one of the first junior colleges in America, started by the president of the University of Chicago in constant consultation with Eliot and other leaders at the time. Interestingly, even though each of those institutions has a radically different mission, they're all being judged by a hierarchy that basically goes back to what's being established by the professions and what's being established by Harvard. So if we have a system that's a kind of circular, self-reinforcing, airtight system of outputs, infrastructure, grading, values, are you a failure? Aren't you a failure? Are you gifted? Or do you have a learning disability? But all of that was specifically, overtly, hundreds of letters about this, created. Eliot was also head of the Committee of 10, by the way, which sets up national standards for high school. So we're talking about a pervasive influence and change. But if you're setting that up for a world of the telegraph, the Model T, the new industrial world, what happens if you live in a world of contingent labor that we're living in now, and a world that I like to think changed on this date, April 22nd, 1993. This was the date that a number of professors who taught at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, came out to the world with one piece of paper and said, we are about to give you an unimaginable gift. What's on this piece of paper is a list of every website in the world. There were about 20. And the gift they gave us on that day was the Mosaic 1.0 browser, a very simple browser that they defined as giving you the ability, if you had an internet connection, that you could interact with anybody else with an internet connection. You could go to any of those incredible full page of websites around the world without an editor, without a publisher. You could contribute, not just receive, but contribute to that world. It's a very, very different model of productivity than the Taylorist model of one person telling you what to do, when to do, and how to do it, and measuring an output as a thing, as something that could be reduced to an A, B, C, D, F grade. There have been a lot of, I think, really heinous ideas about higher education that supposedly are going to prepare us for the world we live in now. This world where anybody with an internet connection can interact without a censor or a publisher with anybody else with an internet connection. One of the ones that was going around for at least a decade and still is the operating theory behind the defunding of public education, the public defunding theory behind the defunding of public education all over the United States, something that was called unbundling. That the university had all these frills, and really we don't need any of those anymore. All we really need are skills. And so there was an emphasis on getting rid of the women's studies program. No ideology involved in that. Or the black studies program. Again, no ideology involved in that. Or humanities, or even social science. In Japan, for example, the Ministry of Education decided that they were going to shut down 26 humanities and social studies departments in the public educations in Japan. And actually, there was a lot of pushback and it didn't happen, but that's the thinking. The idea is you just focus on skills because that's where the jobs are. Two important studies, one Project Oxygen and one Project Aristotle, done by Google itself, right? God Google, showed that in fact the people who are promoted at Google, who rise up the ranks at Google, these are the largest human resources data crunching studies ever undertaken, all hiring, promotion, rejection, all data from Google, from its beginning to the present, just to see what words came up, what things came up. Turns out technical skills were last of the 8 qualities on the list that came out. The things that got managers promoted at Google were collaboration, critical thinking, creative thinking, an ability to synthesize information from complex sources and apply those. Project management, ability to get along well with others. That was the second study. The follow-up study, Project Aristotle, was about teamwork. Google famously has teams, they're sometimes called A-teams. They're not official, but they're the smart people at Google, the people at Google X, right? And those teams are always put together where the smartest person in each subfield basically set to fight against each other for the best ideas. That's competition. Turns out almost none of the major discoveries at Google have come out of the so-called A-teams. They come out of the other project teams that are put together by affinity, not necessarily affinity of field, but affinity of people. And the number one thing that came up with the most successful, most productive, most profitable, and the longest, and interestingly, those are overlap, teams at Google, was no bullying. Okay? It's not being the smartest person in the room that counts. It's being able to hear the person whose voice may not be the loudest, but who may have the most important idea. Nothing about A, B, C, D, F, quantified productivity, output-oriented education is about hearing every voice in the room, including the quiet voice, the suppressed voice, the minority voice, the cognitively different voice, right? But it turned out that's what was winning at Google. Google has changed its hiring algorithms from both studies, to their credit. They're still, I'm not going to be a defender of Google, but interestingly, they did make changes in their hiring algorithms, so you can at least get past the first sort. At Georgetown University, there's something called the Red House, and it literally is a little red house, where they're thinking about the university not as something that you unbundle, not where you get rid of frills, not where you get rid of skills, but in fact, you get rid of the whole idea that some things are frills and some things are skills. And you use all of the incredible resources we have at our universities to rethink problems in complex new ways for the world we're in now. That means all of those things I listed for Eliot, majors, minors, credit hours, all those things are being rethought, literally. And Randy Bass, who's the head of the Red House, likes to ask not just what forms of higher education are possible now, but what forms of higher education are only possible now. It's a challenge. Anyone can propose something new at the Red House. Anyone can come up with something different, and the university supports it. It's basically a think tank for innovation. that's set apart from all of Georgetown, but in fact pervades many parts of Georgetown. In fact, all of it, all the professional schools, the departments, everything. What I'm going to talk about now are various rebundling programs that are happening around the country. And my argument is, one, we have incredibly inspiring models everywhere. I love to talk at diverse institutions. So last week there was a morning, I was at Borough of Manhattan Community College, and I was at Middlebury that afternoon, and then I was at Georgia Tech, and then I was at Agnes Scott College. Today I'm here, I'm going to Yale in a few days, I'm going to university. So in other words, these are vastly different universities, vastly different audiences, and interesting things are happening everywhere. How we go, though, from that idea of small, innovative, exceptional opportunities to remaking the university with that whole kind of infrastructure that we saw with Eliot, and rethinking all of those parts together again now is the challenge. But for now, I'm going to talk about some inspirations. And you all have pencils and paper at your table. In part 3 of this talk, it'll be your turn. That's not just swag. You're actually going to be doing something, but that comes later. Now some models. Randy Bass likes to say that for all universities that are looking at innovation, these are the kinds of questions, not the only ones, but the kinds we should be asking. What if curriculums were redesigned around problems or issues, not disciplines? What if digital literacy, or what's being called by the New York City Council ethical tech, were taught as foundational? What if grades and test scores were not the chief measures for success? What if classrooms were active, student-led, beyond the lecture or the seminar? What if teaching and curriculum were not tied to credit hours or academic calendars? What if students could work on bachelor's and master's degrees at the same time? What if universities created partnerships across diverse institutions? What if purpose was not just workforce ready, but world readiness? When I was at Georgia Tech, the students I was talking to were aerospace engineers, computer science engineers, and I was in a meeting with about 70 undergraduates and several administrators. I said to students, write down on your card, and then we're going to have you read it. We're going to do the same exercise here. But their question, I said, what thing do you really think is important for you to learn at Georgia Tech that will make a huge difference in your life beyond Georgia Tech? Not one person said jobs. Not one student said money. They asked questions like, how do I figure out what I want to do with my life? How do I figure out how to have a purpose? I'm an aerospace engineer. How do I figure out how that can contribute to society? What if I don't want the biggest salary but the most meaningful work? How do I do that? The administrators were floored. In a million years, they didn't think that this group of sort of hand-selected, super smart students were going to go to really deep questions about meaning of my life. But I don't think Columbia students are any different, right? I think the whole idea of the quarter-life crisis is sometimes you get the job you really want, the perfect job you've trained your whole life for, and you're like, wow, this is not what I want, right? In the model institutions that are asking those kinds of big questions, this one I found out after I finished my book, and I'm going to be talking to them at length later on this semester. But in some ways it surprises me most because Yale didn't have to change a thing about its history department. It produces more professors of history than any other university in the country by 4 times the next placement in history. But Yale's history major used to be the #1 major at Yale, and it hasn't been since 2000. Economics is now, I'm giving away my punchline, had become the #1 major. Historians at Yale said, what if we remake our program? Because we believe history is important. What if we remake it so that there's one major you can take if you're planning to go on to graduate school, a pre-professional degree, going on to graduate school to be a history professor like your professors at Yale? And what if we make another history major for anybody in any field who thinks it might be useful to have a complex, comparative, historical perspective on really, really difficult problems? So they did that. Now, any historians here? Oh, wow. Okay. The two gods of history are periodization and nation. You're a historian, what do you do? Oh, I work on the American Civil War, 1865, yeah, right? That's what a historian does. They got rid of those. And they said every course in this non-professional major had to talk about phenomena in a global context, and had to talk about the causes leading into it and leading out of it beyond periodization. What that meant was conversation. Every history professor had to talk to other history professors. Okay. They also adopted the cohort model. Not going to get into this unless you want me to in the Q&A. Not the core model, a cohort model. A cohort model means you define a cohort and people within that cohort share certain kinds of knowledge that's different from people in another cohort. So if you're in the class of 2020, you take a class with every history major in the class of 2020, your freshman year, your sophomore year, your junior year, but the subject matter changes and it's different than the subject matter learned by the class of 2021. What I'm talking to people at Yale about is they're even thinking of having some kind of a competition where students who graduate from the program help come up with the next year, the syllabus for the next year's cohort. That's pretty cool. That's a pretty interesting model. And we've got lots of work from study groups at Harvard to inner city kids in Chicago on how cohorts help with retention, motivation, interest, setting the bar even higher, all kinds of things. Cohort models work. Interestingly, the same historians that redid the non-professional major got bored with their professional major, and they said, well, since we're number one, let's change it. So they've actually gone back and now are changing the pre-professional major as well. And punchline, Yale is now history is now the #1 major at Yale again. Okay. Pretty interesting. I would not have guessed. Oh, it's also part of something by the American Historical Society called Tuning the History Discipline that 123 history departments have taken part in. Many much smaller things, but they're all thinking in those terms. Another one. That internet that got invented, that got made available to us in 1993, is a little problematic these days. If you Googled the name David Hogue 2 days ago, the first thing that came up, he's the young man who was in the shooting victim in Florida who's been so eloquent. 2 days ago, if you Googled him, the first thing that came up was a fake thing that said he was an actor, not a student. That was the first thing in the Google search terms. That got reported in the news. It was the #1 click-through item on YouTube. It's how fake news gets reported. Now if you Google David Hogue, you'll find a correction. He is not. But for 24 hours, a lot of people were believing that the horrible shooting in Florida and this one young man who's been so eloquent were all fake. Literally, that it was all a fake thing by George Soros. One of my favorite critics of the internet, Zeynep Tufekci, says Web 1.0 was it's all about information. Yay, we have information at our disposal. Then let's go social. Now we're kind of in this third world. Weaponized, monetized fraud, bots and trolls, organized attention manipulation, Uberized unregulated labor, algorithmic unaccountability, end of net neutrality, internet of fake things. And she says, I love this line, we're building a dystopia just to make people click on ads. Wow, that's depressing. This cartoon, by the way, I still haven't found out who did it. The original cartoon appeared in the New Yorker in 1993, and the original caption was, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And it was a celebration of anonymity. You can do anything on the internet. Nobody knows who you are. And so, here's this dog saying, hey, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. This one, on the internet, nobody knows you're a democracy. We're in a much more dire situation now than we were in 1993. One of my favorite programs, model programs, that addresses these kinds of issues is a digital sociology program run by Tracy McMillan Cottom at Virginia Commonwealth University, public university, where people who are full professionals in jobs that are stressed by internet changes take a master's degree where they learn key, important concepts of sociology and apply those to their stressed lives, and they're learning code, and they're learning what's in an algorithm, and they're learning about the working conditions of their own company, as they're still working in those fields that are going through stresses. To me, that's a really brilliant, brilliant program. Another one is at Arizona State, a program in arts, media, and engineering, where students take complex general education requirements around not the smorgasbord distribution, but around a problem that requires them to think across many disciplines. And they pose a question each year to the incoming students. It's really hard for any one discipline to understand. My favorite is, what will life be like in Phoenix when there's no more water? Needless to say, you've probably all read Cape Town's about ready to run out of water, and people say Phoenix is number 2 on the list as a major city about to run out. We run out of water, no problem, we'll buy it. What if you're too poor to buy it? That's an ethics and a social justice issue, not just an hydrology issue, right? It's a complex problem that requires you to use your learning, all your learning, rebundled to think about current and urgent problems, and in a deep way. How have other people talked about resource distribution? How's that happened historically? What are the philosophical issues involved in that, as well as the scientific ones? Interestingly, actually I'm gonna move on. Another one, the Tyranny of Testing. Hampshire College, which is known for being inventive and funky and interesting, decided, why are we collecting SAT scores? We're not gonna do it anymore. That may not sound so brave, but it means they can never be in rankings. And they spent years talking to accreditors about could they still be accredited if they didn't collect, literally, do not have any record of ACT or SAT scores. They found that it has improved the kind of students they want to recruit, as well as their recruitment rate and their selectivity. And then one more, and then I'm going to turn this over to you. The lecture and the seminar. What we know from educational sociologists is that faculty tend to think everybody contributes when 20% of students talk in a class. Okay. The people who talk in class tend to most replicate the characteristics of their professor. Okay. So this is interesting. Samuel Delaney went to Bronx School of Science. He was gay, and as soon as he graduated from high school, he ran to the West Village. And he published his first novel at age 20. And never went to college, right? In the 1970s, he had an opportunity to teach at Wesleyan and had this fantasy of what college was going to be like. Many people say he's the greatest autodidact in America. His library is like low library. I mean, he's an astonishingly learned human being. He asked a question and was shocked when those 3 smarties raise their hand. We're most usually happy if we ask a question and 3 smart kids raise their hand, right? 3 smart students. He was appalled. Like, that's not his idea of this utopia of higher education. So he said, don't you realize that every time you don't answer a question, you're learning something? You're learning how to make do with what you got, and you're learning how not to ask for a raise. You're learning how to take it. That's not good. So from now on, whenever I ask a question, everybody's got to put their hand up. I don't care whether you know the answer or not, you have to put your hand up. I'm going to call on you, and if you don't know the answer, I want you to say nice and clear, I don't know the answer to that, Professor Delaney, but I would like to hear what that person has to say, and we'll pass it on. I don't care whether you know or not. You need to teach people they are important enough to say what they have to say. In the same video, he says, not knowing should be the goal of higher education. We're not aiming high enough if people know. We should be testing people so they don't know and want to learn how they know. So for about the last 10 or 15 years, I've remade all my classrooms so my students make the class. My students create syllabi. I'm happy to talk about this in many different ways. They set the requirements for the class. In both of these classes, and one of the students who was in one of those classes, new director of digital projects at Columbia University. This group of students said, we don't want to write dorky term papers. We want to write a book about active learning. Now, if you don't think that's ambitious for students to collectively write a book, it's also had about 30,000 visitors in its various forms. Most academic books do not have 30,000 readers. Right? At the Graduate Center a year and a half ago, I had another group of students said, we want to update that book. We've got some other things to put in that book. And they wrote a book. Right? In both cases, the bar I set was, hi, I'm Cathy Davidson. I'm your professor. I'm going to leave now. And when I come back, I want you to have designed a class that's going to change all of our lives. I've been doing this for 15 years, and everyone says, oh, they're going to get away with it. But I've never had the students set the bar lower than I would have set. In fact, if there's any problem with this kind of teaching, it's saying, dial it back. You're taking 4 classes. You can't fail the other classes. Come on, let's be reasonable here. We've got to do some project management. But if you let students do something meaningful, you don't have to worry about banning laptops and banning cell phones. They're going to be engaged. And in fact, we're going to do something now that will illustrate the most basic technique of all. It's going to take very little time. The first part, it's a 3-part exercise. The first part is 90 seconds. I'm going to set a timer. And that's everybody, please, 90 seconds, take a card and a pencil. If you ran Columbia University, it was yours. And you could change 3 things right now, and you could make a magic wand that would happen. What would you do to revolutionize Columbia University? 90 seconds, totally low stakes, although make it legible because you may not be the last person reading this. 90 seconds, go for it. So this is an exercise I learned from a 2nd grade teacher, but it's also the basis of some practices in medical school. The one in medical school is the way you learn surgery is old. This is really old school. See one, do one, teach one. Right? It's the basic lesson of active learning. I never have a class. It's also called an inventory method because unlike selectivity where 3 people ask questions, everybody gets to be involved. Also, another figure that haunts me is we have, again, educational sociologists saying about 20, according to this study that's been replicated in various versions, between 20 and 25% of students say when they leave college, they've never answered a question unless they've been specifically asked it, so they've never heard their voice in a classroom. Right? So the pair part of this is I want you now, and we're going to do a little bit, because it's a big group, do a little bit of a variation here. 2 things. I want you to work in pairs, very structured. One person reads, don't extrapolate, just reads the 3 things on your card, and the other person listens very quietly, no interruption, then switch. So what that does is everybody gets an opportunity to listen, also underrated. Most people listen to the lecturer, to the professor, don't ever know what's happening among their peers. There's also figures that are very depressing. I don't have the exact number of people being in even classes with 10 or 12 students and graduating without ever knowing the name of anybody else in the class. Right? So you're not really paying attention to all the talent in the room. You're paying attention to what's happening here. And your grade, right? I don't think that's a big surprise. So, 90 seconds, find a partner. One person reads the 3 things, the other person listens, then you switch. Then we're going to do a little variation on share. So you're going to do, every table is going to do 2 things. Pair a person, one reads, one listens, one reads. Then come up with a question that your table can ask the whole group. So first it's a pair, and then you're going to collaborate and tell each other, and you only have 90 seconds to do it. Super low stakes, go for it. And you should be now writing down something that someone from your table is going to read to the whole group. Okay, does everyone have, every table has something they're ready to share with the group? Does everyone have something you're going to share with the group? Can I have your attention, please? Excuse me, can I have your attention, please? Excuse me, please. That's my favorite moment in every talk, where I have to fight for your attention, right? Because with active learning, you have something far more important and more urgent to say than what I'm talking about up here. And we've got lots of research on this. A year from now, if somebody says, that Davidson, you went to a Davidson talk, what did you learn that? What did you talk about that day? The thing you're most likely to say is the thing you wrote on your card, or the thing you came up with in your group. It involves all of it. You get to, for the shy person, there's some magic that happens when you can write something on the card and read it as opposed to talking extemp. People in the field of public speaking say the oldest saw in the field of public speaking is that most people, a majority of people, would rather be in the coffin rather than giving the eulogy at a funeral. Public speaking is terrifying to most people. If you write something on, have somebody write, take the time in a quiet environment to write something and then just read it, somehow it depersonalizes it, makes it possible so everybody can contribute. Sharing with somebody else is a hearing exercise that helps you improve your own thinking, and then synthesizing it into something you're going to share with the group is an incredibly important collaborative skill. These are all meta skills that we do in college. We rarely talk about them. They're probably the most important thing you can learn in the university. But also we know that meta level, the synthesis level, is where learning happens, right? Not just when you hear something. We've had the Ebbinghaus experiments that go all the way back to 1888, the so-called forgetting curve. If you have a major exam you're studying for, within a week after that exam, you're likely to have forgotten up to 75% of the material you studied for that exam. So either my friend Fred Moten is right, that our whole educational apparatus is about how you do, how you're graded, or we have to think about better ways of learning that last beyond the week, 1 week. A very famous elite $70,000 a year private prep school that I'm no longer allowed to name by name, did a study, a great study about 5 years ago, where they had every student in September take the same exact exams they had taken in May. The average grade, best, one of the top 5 schools on every list, fanciest schools on every list, average grade in May, 88. Average grade in September, same students, same exams, 55. Right? That's what attention is. That's what learning is. And what you remember is what's meaningful to you. What you synthesize, what you talk about, what you discuss with somebody else, what you work through. Those are the things that matter to us, and that's what learning is. Right? But it's a choice, and we're about to go around the room with microphones, so you can tell us what you'd revolutionize about the university. But tomorrow, these inventory techniques are techniques that you can use in any classroom. I also use them at the business meetings for my group of fellows and apprentice teachers who are learning these methods. I had a graduate student at a totally failed department meeting raise her hand and say to the professor, a new chair who was utterly despondent because nobody would contribute anything meaningful in this department meeting of maybe 85 people. A graduate student, one of our fellows, said, what if we just turned to somebody and workshopped an idea, and then you went around the room and saw, suddenly the room was alive with ideas. He thought people were hostile. It was just the paralysis that happens in a group when you don't have a method for finding out what real ideas are, and those 2 or 3 noisy people monopolize the conversation. We all know who they are, right? You go to a meeting, you know who's going to ask the long question that usually begins like, I don't know if this is really a question. Maybe I'm the only one who's been in that audience, right? What we're going to do now is we've got 2 microphones. We're just rapid fire, going to go around to each table and have you shout out what you would revolutionize first about the institution.
Trying to tackle the issue of siloed thinking between departments and schools.
We have a terrible echo in here. Can you say that again?
yes, to try to tackle the problem of siloed thinking, creating a structure that would work, facilitating students to cross over more effectively.
Thank you. Silos, wow. I mean, that's really a hard one. Right? Many universities are trying to tackle that. It's a hard one. And we have to. We have to. The world is not silos anymore. Those silos were invented for a reason and a purpose and a time period. Yes. Next one.
How can we foster online collaborative learning across disciplines, schools, and national borders?
Fabulous. Thank you. Everyone can hear these, right? Great. Someone from the table better take that mic. Great. Thank you.
Incentivize / not punish collaboration among teachers.
I just was in an hour-long meeting with your provost and a committee that was talking about how you do that, how you incentivize that. Huge. Clearly a matter we're all concerned about. Thank you.
Provide new types of physical space for interaction, collaboration, and other needs to be defined.
Ah, built environments. Yes, thank you.
Figure out a way to have teaching across disciplines where the core is finding problems.
Ah, excellent. This is exactly what the provost meeting I was in just an hour ago was about. Fascinating.
That was sort of our question. How can we build interdisciplinarity without departments? So I guess we now know.
I think we've got a theme going on here, right? It's good. Just read on the card.
We talked, I think we had a common element in the idea of stimulating student agency.
Again, I'm sorry, I'm in a particular...
Stimulating student agency, how this could be done.
Yes, great, thank you.
Probably a bit wishful, but also thinking, how do we rethink how we assess learning without numerical grades?
Again, I couldn't hear the last part.
Rethink assessing learning without using numerical grading.
Yeah, that's a project. You know, it's interesting. We can assess and evaluate everything in our society. Tinder does a better job than we do. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. Yelp does a better job. Right? You know, we're using a system, multiple choice exam, the first one was invented in 1914 because there was a teacher shortage. And this was going to help test lower order thinking for quote unquote, it's not a term I would use, the lower orders. And now, that test, if I put that test up on a screen, you would think it was written for the SATs yesterday. Weird. We've got all these ways of testing for multiple complex qualities, and we still are using this system that was invented a long time ago. Okay. Yes.
How do we facilitate inter-department, inter-school communication across faculty and students?
Excellent. Silos in assessment, student agency, these are really deep, key issues.
I have a somewhat unfair advantage because I have designed a university from scratch, and the key point was go to the one class at a time block system where you take 4 courses in a row instead of 4 courses simultaneously.
Yeah, excellent.
Change our grading system so we're more like Hampshire College.
So we're more like, I didn't hear the last word?
Hampshire College.
Recognition of the Graduate Workers Union.
Excellent. I was at a school that, I'm not going to even say it. I'm at a unionized school now, and I'm a very happy person. But I know that that's not a beloved point of view.
How do we revamp the curriculum so students take only 2 multidisciplinary courses per semester?
That's great.
So a common theme on our table was communication. As a student here, a lot of the departments work compartmentalized, and just basic communication would be quite helpful and less arduous for students.
And I hope that by going back and looking at the history, you realize it's not some capriciousness of Columbia. This is a system, it's an infrastructure. It was designed My pet peeve is people say, you can't change higher education because higher education hasn't changed since Socrates walked the floor of the academy over 2,000 years ago. Actually not. Education was carefully, structurally, systematically, block by block redesigned in order to make a professional managerial class for the age of the Model T and the telegraph, right? Also came worker rights, labor regulation. I keep saying, do you all know what the book The Jungle is? Published in 1906 that created a huge movement where people started thinking about all the different related points of technology and what was happening with industrialization. We desperately need the jungle for now, right? Where labor, attention, silos, assessment, selectivity, I'm trying to think of some of the other things, credit hours, imposed structures that might not have anything to do with actual knowledge production, right? I mean, we don't learn outside of school. If you have to really learn something challenging outside of school, you never. My 9-month-old, B- on walking today. We don't do that, right? External summative measures do not work. All they work for is to do better on that external summative measure. Okay? But we have a whole system that was based on a world that has changed radically. And what I loved about the comments that you all made is clearly we are all thinking together and deeply about those issues. Now we have to go from those places that give us inspiration. And what I tried to do in my book was an ethnography of all kinds of different colleges, universities, community colleges, community organizations. They're using these methods and actually making some kinds of change. But how we go from that to a systemic structural change. I'm afraid we probably don't have, do we have change for, we have time. We have 3 minutes. Does anyone bravely want to ask a question in the 3 minutes we have left? Anyone? If not, okay, yes, thank you.
I really appreciated this, and one of the questions I want to ask is the relationship between education and industry a little bit more. You know, because there's, of course, the feedback loop between the current education system we have optimizing for itself. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on changes to education that could happen not just from education, but from practice or from discipline onto education. Because, of course, the feedback loop onto education works both ways, right?
Feedback loop starts in New York. I think it starts in the cradle. I mean, the crazy, crazy system of education we have in this city and selectivity in this system. I think that if I were going to change something, it sounds counterintuitive. I would start with assessment, because until you change the way you measure an outcome, everything else flows from that. If you get rid of that as an outcome, a typical college student now in America tests earlier and more often, gives high-stakes summative tests earlier and more often than any other country on the planet. And a typical student, by the time they get to college, has had 112 of those exams where somebody says, this is going to go on your permanent record. So the feedback loop is not just discipline and institution, it's in your head, right? It's, am I a failure? Am I going to succeed? Is this learning? It's not learning. Is this degree going to get me a job? Or am I going to starve to death? A weird bunch of polarities that are deep, deep polarities. We now know, for example, we didn't know this for the last decade, humanities majors get just as many jobs and have just as much job satisfaction as people in STEM. Just recently, maybe a month ago, Pew revealed a huge longitudinal study on that. There is a difference. People in STEM have a higher income level than people in the humanities. Maybe I don't want to spend money enough to have that huge income. Maybe I would like to be a chef. You know, in other words, values, reward systems, outputs, disciplines, all of that is, I love your term of feedback loop. It's a constantly self-replenishing feedback loop. And how you break that loop and get out of the system, that's the mandate we all have. Thank you. That was a fabulous question to end on. Thank you. I think we can end there. Thank you very, very much for being here. Thank you.